My sister vanished on a beach trip, left her kids at my door, then tried to destroy my career when I refused to play mom. I didn't just survive her betrayal. I built a life worth fighting for, and won custody of the only two people who ever truly felt like family. My name is Nicole, and I grew up in a family where love was conditional, appearances were everything, and I was always compared to someone I could never be. My sister Chloe was the golden child. Blonde, flirtatious, loud, and effortlessly charming. She had our mother wrapped around her finger from the moment she could speak. I, on the other hand, was quiet, dark-haired, a bookworm. I wore glasses, got good grades, and mostly stayed out of the way. To my mother, that made me forgettable. To Chloe, that made me a target. We grew up in a town just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. Dry heat, gated communities, and PTA moms who judged each other by the cars they drove. Our mother, Dana, lived for her reputation. She was the type to bake cookies for charity drives, but not speak to her own daughter unless someone else was watching. Chloe could do no wrong. When she got a nose piercing at 15, it was expressing herself. When I dyed the ends of my hair blue at 17, it was a desperate cry for attention. When Chloe crashed her car senior year while texting her boyfriend, my mom bought her a new one the following month. When I asked for help buying books for college, she told me to get a second job. So I did. I worked through college, graduated with honors, got hired by a startup in San Francisco, worked my way up, and by 27, I was making six figures and living in a loft with a view of the bay. No one in my family cared, except when they needed something. Chloe had 2 kids by the time she was 30, by 2 different men, both of whom were long gone. She bounced from boyfriend to boyfriend, job to job, and every time something fell apart, my mom would call me. "She's struggling, Nicole. You know how hard it is for single mothers." "You mean like how hard it was for me to put myself through school with 0 support?" I'd ask. "Don't be cruel," she'd snap. "Family helps family." That was a phrase I heard a lot, especially when Chloe needed money, or a babysitter, or a place to crash. I never said yes. Not because I didn't care, but because I had learned that giving them anything only led to them taking more. But none of that prepared me for the day Chloe dropped her kids off at my doorstep with no warning, no plan, and no intention of coming back for weeks. It was a Saturday morning. I was still in my pajamas, halfway through a cup of coffee, when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find her 2 boys, Mason, 8, and Tyler, 5, standing there with suitcases. "Where's your mom?" I asked. "She said you're watching us." She left in an Uber. I stood frozen. She hadn't texted, hadn't called. The last I heard from her was 3 weeks ago, when she messaged me a photo of herself at a resort in Cabo, tagging some guy named Dimitri. I let the kids in, sat them on the couch, and started calling. 10 unanswered calls later, she finally picked up. "Nicole," she said, exasperated, like I had done something wrong. "This is why I never ask you for anything. I'm going away for a bit. It's important. Don't make this harder than it has to be. You abandoned your children on my doorstep. That's not a request. That's a crime. Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "They're your nephews. You have a nice place. You don't even have kids. It's not a big deal. I have a life, Chloe. I have a job. Plans. A trip next month. Cancel it. They're more important. And if you don't want the world to know what you're really like, you'll shut your mouth and be a good sister." Then she hung up. I stared at the phone in disbelief. My hands were shaking. It wasn't just the audacity. It was the fact that she knew what she was doing. She expected me to cave, but I didn't. I called CPS, reported the abandonment, explained the whole situation. They opened a case, said they'd send someone in a few days, and in the meantime, asked me to care for the boys as a temporary guardian. So I did, and I fell in love with them. Not in a Hallmark movie way. In a real, raw, painful way. Like finding pieces of myself I didn't know were missing. Mason was quiet and sensitive. Tyler was mischievous and loved dinosaurs. Neither of them had ever been told they were smart or special or worthy of kindness. But I told them, every night. A week later, Chloe showed up with a man twice her size who barely spoke English. She forced her way into my apartment, tried to drag the kids out. When I blocked her, he pushed me down so hard I hit my head against the floor. She took them, and I called the police. What followed was a year-long nightmare. Court hearings, CPS investigations, more threats, lies. She tried to get me fired by calling my company and accusing me of having untreated mental illness. But I had documentation. I had a therapist, and I had evidence. I recorded her threats, her rants, her admissions. In the end, she was arrested for child endangerment and assault. My mother finally turned against her, not because she believed me, but because it was her only chance to avoid jail herself. And I won. I got custody. The boys came home. To me. We decorated their rooms, made pancakes on Sundays, played Mario Kart after homework. Mason cried when he saw his old stuffed bear on the bed. Tyler asked if he could call me Mom. I told him he could call me anything he wanted. They were mine, not by blood, not by birth, but by choice. And in the end, that's what real family is. Not who you're born to, but who stays, who fights for you, and who never makes you feel like you have to earn love. Nicole. But even after the boys were officially mine, the wounds Chloe left behind didn't just disappear. There were days Mason would wake up crying from nightmares. Days when Tyler asked if their mom was still mad. I enrolled them both in therapy. I joined them too. And slowly, they began to heal. We all did. One evening, Mason brought home a crayon drawing from school. It was our little apartment, with the three of us outside holding hands. He wrote, in careful block letters, "My family." I taped it to the fridge. It's still there, and every time I look at it, I remember what we went through, and how we survived it together. Because this story didn't end with rescue. It began with it. It was around the 3rd month of full custody that I began to feel the dust settling. The court hearings were behind us. The endless paperwork, the therapy intake sessions, the whispered conversations in school hallways, all of it slowly quieted. The boys had begun to flourish. Mason started a reading program at school, and for the first time ever, his teacher sent home a note saying, "He's a leader. Other kids look up to him." I cried reading that. Tyler, always the little ball of energy, had discovered a love for music. I signed him up for Saturday drum classes, and every weekend, he would come home tapping rhythms on pots and pans, laughing until his cheeks turned red. We had routines now. We had trust. But peace never lasts long when the past hasn't finished with you. It started with an envelope. No return address. Just my name in sharp block letters, and inside, a single sheet of paper. You can't keep them forever. Blood matters. There was no signature. No context. But I knew. Chloe, or someone who still believed in her. My lawyer said not to worry. That it was most likely a bluff, especially given the outcome of the custody battle and Chloe's pending sentencing. But it still shook me. Not because I feared losing them, but because I feared how easily a shadow could creep back in once the light started to shine. The boys didn't know about the letter. I didn't want to scare them, but I started locking the doors tighter, checking behind me more often, asking neighbors if they'd seen anything strange. Trauma had a way of echoing. 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from a reporter. "Hi, Nicole. I'm writing a piece on familial custody disputes and came across your name during a review of public court records. Would you be open to speaking about your experience?" My stomach twisted. I politely declined and hung up, then immediately called my lawyer. He said there was no real danger. Custody cases were public record, yes, but any threats or ongoing cases would remain sealed. Still, he advised caution. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the hallway outside the boys' rooms, listening to the sound of their breathing through the cracked doors, and wondered, when would we finally be free? Then came the subpoena. Not from Chloe this time. From our mother. Dana wanted visitation. Yes, the same woman who once told me I'd been born with a curse in my bloodline. The one who spat every time she spoke my name in court. She was suddenly petitioning the court for regular grandparental contact. I laughed when I first saw it. Then I cried. Because even with Chloe gone, Dana hadn't let go of the idea that these children were hers to claim. Not to love, not to nurture, but to own. I brought the boys to the beach that weekend. I didn't tell them about the subpoena. Instead, we built sandcastles and collected shells and ate ice cream that melted too fast. It was the kind of day I never had as a kid, and I wanted them to have it, in case I had to fight again. I met Dana in court the following week. She wore pearl earrings and a navy blue skirt suit, like she was attending a brunch, not a legal battle. Her lawyer made a lot of impassioned statements about biological ties and emotional heritage. Mine countered with her history of neglect, her enabling of Chloe, and her complete lack of relationship with the boys. Dana didn't look at me once, but I stared at her the entire time. I wanted her to see what I had become. Strong, steady, a mother in every way that mattered. The judge ruled against her. She left the courtroom without a word, and I stood in the hallway afterward, holding the file against my chest like it was a newborn, realizing for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid anymore. The boys and I celebrated that night with a movie marathon and popcorn. Tyler fell asleep halfway through his second bowl, drooling on the couch, and Mason curled up next to me and whispered, "I like when it's just us." "Me too, kiddo," I said. "Me too." The months that followed felt like a new beginning. There were still shadows, of course. There always would be. But we had found our light. I started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. Just journaling, small essays, short reflections about motherhood, identity, and resilience. Sometimes I wrote about Dana. More often, I wrote about the boys. How Tyler had finally learned to tie his shoes without help. How Mason gave a speech at school about someone who inspires you, and talked about me. I didn't cry that day. I sobbed in the parking lot for 20 minutes after the assembly. There were still hurdles. Tyler had a panic attack during a fire drill at school. Mason started having stomach aches that weren't physical, just the residue of old fear. I found a trauma-informed child therapist who worked wonders. We did group sessions and one-on-ones. I went to therapy too. Healing, I realized, wasn't a straight path, but it was real. One Saturday morning, we had just finished pancakes when there was a knock at the door. I tensed up, my first instinct still shaped by too many surprises. But it wasn't Dana, or Chloe, or any ghost from the past. It was Mason's teacher. "Sorry to show up like this," she said, "but I wanted to drop something off in person." She handed me a folder. Inside was a short essay. The title read, "My Safe Place." It was about our home, about the blankets on the couch, the way I tucked them in, the music Tyler played while brushing his teeth, my tea kettle whistle, the way I always cut their sandwiches diagonally. Mason had written, "My safe place is where I'm loved even when I mess up. It's where my aunt became my mom. It's where we started over." I held that paper like it was made of glass. And I knew, right then, no matter what else came, I had already won. It's been 2 years now since the custody was finalized. Chloe never showed her face in court again. From what I heard, she fled the state, maybe even the country, when the final ruling came down. I don't care where she went. For the first time in my life, her absence feels like a gift. My mom, Dana, tried to make contact once. A letter in a familiar floral envelope. I didn't open it. Whatever she had to say was too little, too late. These days, Mason and Tyler are thriving. Mason joined the school debate team, and Tyler just won a regional art contest. Their laughter fills the halls every morning, and bedtime always ends with a story and a kiss goodnight. I still keep that crayon drawing taped to the fridge, my family, in big block letters, 3 figures holding hands. I used to think I wasn't cut out for motherhood. Now I can't imagine life without it. They call me mom now, both of them. The first time Tyler said it, I cried in the car for 20 minutes. Not because I was sad, but because, for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. And every time someone asks if I have kids, I smile. Yes, I say, 2 boys. They're everything. Because in the end, family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shows up, who stays, who fights for you, and who never, ever lets go.